This is Fuji's current latest and greatest, the X-H1. It's an APS-C powerhouse that performs spiffingly in both video and photo. But on paper, it sounds a lot like this. Today we're going to look at whether this is worth the extra money or whether you should save some coin and buy this geriatric old thing.
Fuji's X-H1, the new kid on the block, is their new flagship camera, standing above the mighty X-T2. Utilising the same sensor, it now brings some in-body image stabilization and some improved video performance, now shooting cinema 4K as well as 120 frames per second slow motion. Improved autofocus and burst rate means that this too is a very capable photography camera. Roll back to December 2016 when this little guy entered the scene. The successor to the much-loved A6300, the A6500 carries an APS-C sensor with similar megapixel count, and it too has IBIS, 4K, slow motion, and its autofocus is also blindingly fast.
With a $600 price difference, it's time to see whether this is really worth all that extra money, or if you should just get one of these and spend that extra money on a lens. In terms of physical appearance, both of these cameras look really rather different. The X-H1 is more of a typical SLR style, with the viewfinder straight down the middle, whereas the A6500 is kind of more of a rangefinder styling with the viewfinder off to the left here. Now this is obviously a smaller and sleeker and more portable design, however there are several advantages with a bigger body, such as the extra dials that you're getting here. You have a shutter speed dial and an ISO dial, as well as this AF joystick up back. And also you have this screen up the top here. It's very reminiscent of the 80s, which kind of shows you what settings you have and the battery life you have remaining. All of these combined with this beefy grip that they've added here, which is much nicer to hold than the A6500. All these combined make it so much easier and so much nicer to work with on the fly, especially when you're making changes. You merely have to twist these knobs. To compensate for the lack of dials, the A6500 has a series of custom buttons which just aren't as intuitive to use when you're working, and also a lot of the times it means you have to lift your eye up to find out certain things and you just can't keep shooting.
The X-H1 also has a dual SD card slot as opposed to the lonely single one on the A6500.
I also have to mention that this is weather sealed, whereas this is merely dust and water resistant. So it really comes down to whether you're looking for portability or functionality. So let's start with the photography side of things. I've taken both cameras to a junior hockey game, and I fitted them both with 18 to 135mm lenses. So let's see which of these is going to perform better in this scenario. Tests have shown that the ISO performance of the X-H1 should perform slightly better than the A6500, but once we've taken our images, we'll take it back to the computer and we'll see if it really is noticeably better.
Both cameras provided some very nice image quality with plenty of detail. However, I preferred the image of the X-H1 overall. I felt the colours rendered nicer and the image was noticeably less noisy than the A6500 on the same settings.
The autofocus on both cameras is actually pretty damn nippy. The X-H1 combines both on-sensor face detection as well as contrast detection to get that improved autofocus accuracy over 325 autofocus points. The A6500, however, uses face detection using what Sony calls the 4D autofocus system, which basically, once you've locked onto a target over their 425 autofocus points, it predicts their movement in order to shift where the next focus will be. So let's look at the burst mode on these two cameras. Now with the mechanical shutter you're getting 8 frames per second on both, but with the A6500 with the electronic shutter you're getting 11 frames per second, and with the X-H1 you're getting 14 frames per second. Now if you add the vertical power booster, your mechanical shutter goes up to 11 frames per second. So let's do some spray and pray and let's see how well each of these perform.
I found both cameras plenty adequate in terms of burst fire, but once again, due to the autofocus, the Sony provided more usable photos in the end.
Listen to the wonderful sound of that burst. This is a lovely sound that you're not getting with the X-H1 because of the leaf shutter. It's far more quieter and you don't really get that lovely kick, which probably isn't such a great thing because it can affect your photos.
Personally, I love the sweet sound of that shutter slapping away. However, Fuji's quieter leaf shutter produces less camera shake. As the matches drew to a close, it was time to test out the other features elsewhere. I headed to a not so nearby aviary.
Now Sony's A6500 comes pre-packaged with its now infamous S-Log2 and S-Log3. So it's going to take a lot of convincing for people to make the switch from that to this. And I'm really interested to see how well F-Log performs against S-Log. Now both cameras offer 4K internal, but only the X-H1 offers Cinema 4K, whereas the A6500 only offers ultra high definition, though both will give you 4K at 30 frames per second. The one thing to make note is that the Fujifilm X-H1 has a crop factor of 1.17, whereas the A6500 has no crop factor. Both of them offer also Full HD and just normal HD variants, as well as super slow motion in 120 frames per second. Now I'm quite excited to see which one of these is going to end up looking better, especially with the slow motion, because I tend to find that the Sony ones are a little bit on the mushy side, but we'll see which one is the successor. So having used both of these cameras now for video, I will say that I'm really appreciating the EVF on the X-H1. It's looking far sharper and much more pleasant to my eye than the A6500. However, I will say that the autofocus on this is far more a pleasant experience than I'm finding with the X-H1. In fact, in certain situations, it felt like the autofocus just wouldn't lock on, and then when I switched to manual, it was just a far easier affair.
The 4K footage from both cameras looked pretty good and seemed to grade okay in Resolve. Now 8-bit footage will always be kind of funny to grade. Now I didn't see any major advantages with F-Log over S-Log2, however I did see a difference in the slow motion. The A6500 performed slightly better here in 100 frames per second with slightly less mushy imaging, though both are hardly stellar performers here. One thing worth mentioning here though is that the Fuji is capped at 15-minute 4K recordings unless, you guessed it, you buy the booster group, which brings it to Sony's 30-minute cap.
I feel that overall the Fuji X-H1 should take the win here. It's really won me over with its rugged, robust and more functional body. It just made for a nicer experience to shoot with. Now, whilst both cameras are very capable in both stills and video, I felt that the colours coming off the X-H1 were nicer to my eye. But once again, these are just my opinions and my thoughts. You may think differently.